Hey, and welcome back to the Expanding Consciousness podcast, where we just talk about all sorts of topics to explore them and have a discussion going and connect with one another. I'm here again with Nikki. We talked on another episode about Nikki's experience with therapy and in line with what is therapy, what makes a therapist masterful, and what Nikki found useful and really beneficial for her. And we highlighted that therapy is so unique. Each individual is so unique. You are your own specialist, and what you need from a therapist is not necessarily what the next person needs, and about having your own agency and autonomy to be able to understand and voice your needs. And as we were talking about that, Nikki would really like to humanize me from the therapist perspective to what it's been like for me as a client and my process of, I suppose, becoming a therapist. And it stemmed from an experience that Nikki had where she asked one of her therapists back in the day whether they saw a therapist, and they did. And that was a bit shocking,
That was very shocking. It was... Yeah, I couldn't believe they were human.
And we're talking about that, there's that power dynamic where sometimes the therapist can be seen as the expert. And we talked about that in the previous podcast where there's this equanimity between the client and the therapist. That's what I hold and value. And that the client is the specialist on themselves. And as much as I have training as a therapist, we come together, and that's what therapy's about, is having that connection, having that relationship. So I'm here to be in the hot seat and to share a little bit with you from my personal lived experience as a client and how that's informed me. So it's on you now, Nikki. Over to you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
So from our previous podcast, the first question was asked about my history with therapy, and I mainly gave a negative experience. I'm curious to see what was your personal history with therapy, both positive and negative.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I've had a mix over the years, and I'll say that the very first therapy experience I can remember was, and in terms of formal therapy, was in high school, going to the student counsellor, or the counsellor that was there for students. And it was around exam time. And I give you this story because there's a little bit in it which is really fundamental to, I guess, how I've also developed and what I value in therapy for myself and as a therapist for clients. So I remember going into his office, and I'd never really talked to him before or gone to have counselling with him. So we didn't have that relationship. And I was really overwhelmed and stressed. And my English teacher, who I highly respected and felt that he really respected me, he was walking past and noticed me in there, and he just popped his head in and said, "Hey, how you going?" So I was just having an informal chat with the counsellor at this stage. And I invited him in the room because all of a sudden I just got really upset, and I was crying and was quite vulnerable. And so we had this confidential conversation, and I can't remember which one of them asked me, but they asked me what was the worst thing that would happen, that I perceived would happen to me. And out of all my tears, so it was about exam time, and they asked me what's the worst thing would happen if I got a bad score on my exams. And I just said, I'm going to die. And with that, I just burst out laughing because it was just like the absurdity of that. My brain, my subconscious had gone, I'm going to die if I don't do well on these exams. And I was catastrophizing. And I look back on that and I think I wouldn't have been able to, I think, open up as quickly with the counsellor if my English teacher hadn't been there. Purely for the fact that I didn't have that therapeutic rapport and relationship with the counsellor. But I had that with my English teacher. So that was really key for me to establish trust and safety and the power of relationship. So that's been key. And even in my personal life, relationship and connection is really core to who I am, and having harmony within that. And the other aspect of that is part of what's informed my therapeutic modalities, the theoretical foundation of how I operate as a therapist is, you know, that's our survival, right? So my brain was telling my body we're going to die if we don't do well in these exams. And it's challenging those negative beliefs, challenging our beliefs full stop, and seeing which ones are constructive, which ones are deconstructive, what's healthy, what's unhealthy. So that was one experience of, I suppose, informal therapy in a way. Then I've had experiences over time as well where I've had the therapeutic relationships being really honoured and respected, and space has been held. I've had counsellors who use psychoeducation, so they explain what's going on. I really enjoy that because I'm very practical. I'm very creative and I'm very emotive, but I'm also very practical and logical at the same time. So having counsellors who got that, and we talked about that in the previous episode as well, the importance of having people that understand you and the therapist that clicks with you.
Yeah.
So that was really important for me. Unfortunately as well, I have had some negative experiences with therapy where trust and confidentiality have been breached, have been broken. And that was massive. Just to kind of sit with that for a minute. And I mean, it's heartbreaking in a way to be so open and trusting and have that misused. I found that really difficult. And it was even hard because some of it was when I was in training, that I was a student counsellor. It was really hard to be treated like that by counsellors who, you know, you have that trust and you kind of expect them to be able to hold space.
Yeah.
And so I had a level of, I suppose, understanding that we are all human. Mistakes do happen. But on the other level, having gone through that personally, just feeling the utter heartbreak, I suppose, of like the trust is broken.
It's very hard to repair. And thank you very much for sharing your perspective and your history with us. It's such a vulnerable thing to do. And thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you.
So for the next question, so since you gave us the history that you two are a human, you two have problems.
Yeah. Yes.
I want to ask, how do you keep a professional and personal balance with your clients? Because it's both on the ends of extremes that can be far too personal and far too professional. So I believe when you're far too professional, you put up walls and there's no connection. And when it's far too personal, you start to put yourself in the experience and the client is no longer in the chair, and therefore there's no connection. So how do you keep that balance where you can help your client be open to you while maintaining that humility?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a nice juicy one. So we're looking at that pendulum swing, right? And you've got that real clinical, sterile professionalism. And I've definitely had that experience before in my own therapy. And perhaps there's nothing wrong with that for some people, right? And that this is that whole, we're all individual. And it's also that, you know, and this is what this podcast is about, is just exploring these ideas. So whatever's said, I just want to put in here that whatever is said is based on my experience. You know, what was said last podcast is your experience, and we've each got our own experience. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong, so to speak. So you've got that end of it where it's that real clinical setting, and then the other end where, and this is I suppose where the harm can be caused, is where it's too personal, and where therapists can share too much, or they get too involved as a friend, or a different dynamic that's not therapeutic. So how do I balance that? It takes a lot of awareness. It's taken life experience. I've had a lifetime where I've experienced bullying and experienced loneliness, not belonging, experienced other sort of forms of abuse and trauma, you know, not being listened to, not being believed, being neglected. So I think my life experience has shaped the way that I approach therapy. Not only my experience as a client in therapy, but my experience as a human in life. And so it's so tricky, right? Because we've got our code of conduct, got our ethics to be upheld, and they are very important. And we're also human. So when you get two humans together, there's two hearts, right? There's two bodies, there's two souls, there's two minds, and there's this energy that comes together, and you co-create a relationship. And it can be tricky because, I mean, some days it's easy. You know, I show up in the therapy space and nothing will be triggering that the client says. All right, if I'm nice and balanced in my personal life and things are going well. Then there's other times that maybe something the client says will bring something up in me. And I think it's really important that that's natural. Just to say that, because we are these alive beings, it's natural that things are going to come up that we can relate to. Because when you're connected with someone and when you really care, you're going to be open. And the therapy space is a very vulnerable space. Yeah. So for me, to balance that, there's professional disclosure. So we're trained in working out, you know, how much you can disclose. And that it kind of depends per therapist, what they're comfortable with, and per client. One skill that we learn, one technique, is bracketing. So if something does come up, or say something's just on my mind and I find I'm just not losing interest but getting distracted, is the technique of bracketing, where it's like taking that thought or that feeling, the experience, and going, hey, I'm just going to caress you, right? I see you. Thank you for being here. But right now, this is the time for my client. So I'm going to put you over here and I will come back to you. And that's just having that relationship in myself. And it takes a lot, because you're in session and the client's talking and there's this dynamic going, and then I've got this dynamic going with myself as well, and trying to navigate that. And so sometimes I remember a supervisor once said to me, is that you can say to the client, hey, you were just explaining something to me and I was getting distracted. No fault of your own. I just wondered if we could revisit that so I can give you the attention that it needs, that you need. So, and that's like making it human again.
Yeah.
Right? We're not perfect. No matter how hard I try, I'm not going to be perfect. But I can be real, and I can be honest, and I can be honourable of the client in that. And to me, that's the balance. It's being in tune with myself and go, okay, what's coming up? Is it coming up in me because it's something to ask the client about? Is it something unresolved in me? that I just need to put aside and deal with in my own therapy. And that's a really key reason why we go and see a therapist, is so that we don't bring our baggage to these sessions because we want to be here for the client, for the client to have that space that's totally theirs. It doesn't mean that nothing's going to come up for us. It just means that to the best of my ability, I'm going to be able to show up for the client. Yeah.
That's really, really interesting. 'Cause not often you ever hear the therapist's perspective on anything, especially in my experience. None of them really talked.
Yeah.
But it's great that you can be open and honest and just be very, very transparent with your audience to show that therapists are people too.
Yeah.
It is a very challenging profession that requires a lot of self-reflection, adaptability, and constant learning. I like how you're a constant learner. Even if you achieve a high position in the academic community or the therapeutic community, you would always call yourself a learner. And that's what I love about it, that there's constantly articles and studies, new techniques being published every day, which is amazing. And to find a therapist that can adapt to that is absolutely key, because it means it shows open-mindedness, it shows humility, and shows that you really care about not just your profession but for your client, and the client will sense that.
And I just truly, my heart just cares for the world and just all of creation in it, the humans, the animals, everything in between, nature, everything. And I really just want everyone to be able to be in harmony, with themselves and with others. And I think a key aspect of knowing how to balance relationship dynamics is to have my own life, right, as a person. And I know we've talked before, in the previous episode together, about how when we're wounded and we're in the wounding, we can focus a lot on problem solving and trying to solve problems. And we can kind of get to this stage where the wounding isn't as crushing. Then the next stage is into how do we live? How do we become alive? How do we thrive? And shift into that. And that's something that I've learned because of various things that have happened in my life. I would chase problems. And I think that's what has made me into a great therapist and continuously makes me into that, because I seek the root of the issue. And I want to do anything to empower and equip the client to getting to the bottom, getting to the root, and getting that out. Because once we get the weeds out, once we get the toxins out, our body can cleanse, right? Our mind can cleanse, and we can heal. And part of my learning of that is to have self-care, is a bit of a buzzword, but it's to have self-care and self-love. And
that's not like drawing bubble baths or anything like
that. No.
No.
It's the solid, how do I make it my lifestyle that I'm going to be well? So rather than having disease or dis-ease in life, rather than not being at ease, how do I live well so I can thrive? And it's a constant process. I take a holistic approach to it. I'm always have been very spiritually connected. I love creation, love animals, love nature, love that connection. And so I really draw on that. It's beautiful. There's a lot of science behind the benefits of nature, the benefits of animals, the different frequencies that are in it when we spend time in nature and all of that. And I didn't know that when I was like 5 years old. I didn't know the science, but I knew it felt good. And over life, I have got distracted. I have stopped looking after myself at times. I've been in such a place of wounding that it's hard to care for me. And I might only do it when things get dire. When I don't have anywhere else to turn, when things are really stressful, that's when I look after myself. And I've learned that's not good enough, or it's not enough when it comes to looking after other people and being a therapist. I need to make sure that I'm practicing what I'm preaching.
Yes.
And I'm living by what I'm teaching people. And that's the only way it's fully effective. And this isn't to say that just doing a little bit, like wherever you're at in your life, you're doing great and it is enough. It will come a point where something within you will say this isn't effective or as effective anymore, and we need something different. And it's really about listening to you. You mentioned before about that pendulum of being really professional versus too personal. It's really within the grounds of ethical conduct and professionalism and keeping the client safe. It really is dependent on the client as to how much I'll disclose, or how clinical I might be. I tend to like therapy to be more really open and expansive and explorative like that. And for me to find that balance, it's to make sure I have time outside of therapy to really balance my life, because in that way I can really show up for my clients because I've shown up for myself. And that was a huge lesson for me, that whole put yourself first, because if you don't, you can't look after others. That's taken me a long time to learn.
Yeah, unfortunately, we all got to learn that one the hard way.
Yeah.
Because we cannot have any love for other people if we cannot love ourselves first. I'm a firm believer in looking after and caring for yourself. And that's the only way how you can learn to love people. You've got to fill up your cup first, and whatever overflows, that goes out to others.
Yeah.
That is so important. Love is not self-sacrificing. Cannot stress that enough. There's nothing noble about self-sacrificing. It is draining. It is exhausting. And I love how that you just embody empathy. You put your empathy out there. You're so transparent and so comfortable being vulnerable as well. And I find that very inspiring. And it really turns that notion that being empathetic or being soft-hearted is weakness, and that's something that's not respected or tolerated in this world, especially in positions of power where that's needed the most. So it's great to see that empathy and caring for ourselves and one another is strength. Yes. There's a lot of strength.
And it's what makes us human, and we are all, I would say, soft, gentle hearts.
I think so too. Like some of the hardest exterior that I've seen in people, I see the hurt on the surface, but deep down you can see right through it. Especially when you get a healed mindset, you'll be able to empathize better with other people and be able to accept for who they are now. But it's always their choice if they feel like this isn't working for me. It's okay to say that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. The healed mindset. When you said that, my heart was like, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that, and it is beautiful. And yeah, I just want to clarify, as that came up, the healed mindset, before I'd said, for me, it wasn't good enough to just do those little snippets of self-care when I'd reached my limit and I was really struggling. And just to clarify and emphasize that what I was doing was good enough in its sense, right?
Yes.
It's just, it became, and this is where terminology and wording comes into it, it just wasn't as healthy or helpful for me to be pushing myself to burn out and then looking after myself. And in that, it wasn't working anymore. Therefore, it wasn't good enough for what I needed. And so it became about resourcing again and going, okay, having that humility to go, this isn't working. I was wrong. Burning out and then looking after myself is not the way to go.
No, that was a very, very hard lesson.
Yeah. And to speak to that is, and to humanize even more, is that I've learned that from clients as well. From watching their growth and watching them self-love and reward themselves and fill up their cup and do their work and show up to therapy. It's actually really empowering for me as well, because it's like these people, they're sharing their heart and soul with me, right? And all I want to do is honor and love that.
Yeah.
That's
such a privilege. It really is.
And hold space and really work with and personalize, do whatever it takes, do whatever I can to serve. And that's purely just where my heart is. It's
I love that serve. That really spoke. Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome.
I think we've got time for another question.
Yeah.
So I love how you're being so transparent about this. But I'll ask another spicy question.
All right. We like.
So how can clients know that they are safe and assured in you as a therapist when personal problems occur in your life? Because clients need that strength that they can rely on you. They need someone to lean on. They need a rock. But also they're needing connection. They're needing humility. So how can you achieve that level of safety and assurance for your clients, knowing that there might be some really difficult circumstances going on in your life? You could experience the grief of a loved one, for instance, or maybe you might have been triggered by something.
Yeah. Whew, that is a spicy one. That's good. That's good.
But I'm very, very curious to hear what you have. And just want to see what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, thank you. Oh.
Feel free to give yourself some time for this. It is a burning question that I've always wanted to ask my therapist, and now I have the opportunity.
Yeah, there you go.
So I'll let you meditate on that for a little bit. If you'd like me to
ask it again,
read it again.
Yeah, thanks.
So how can clients be safe and assured in you as a therapist when personal problems occur in your life?
What's coming up first is, in no way do I want to put what I'm going through onto the client. So I'm taking full ownership that this is mine. And in doing that, it means that I've got to do my work and be in a deep attunement and connection with my body and with my mind and what's going on for me. So that's kind of what happens in the background for me, right? That's what's happening within my heart of hearts is I know, and this is that professional boundary, the client's not the one to talk about. And this is where developing my own support network, professionally, having supervision, having my own therapy. So supervision is where I go, whether it's one-on-one with a supervisor or with a group, and that we can sort of talk about things that are coming up or that we're struggling with and get support on a professional level. Personal therapy, that one's self-explanatory. Professional development, so constantly learning different techniques. Being really honest and humble with myself and just going, okay, something's still coming up I'm struggling with. I need to work on that, and not running from it. And even if I'm not quite ready to deal with it, because that's what happens sometimes, we're not ready to face things. Things can be too painful, too confusing, too unknown. But it's having awareness and putting strategies in place that it's not going to infiltrate into sessions with the client. When it's in session, using the bracketing like I explained. And it's kind of, this one's a tricky one, and it's something that I really learned in my counselling placement just this year, is it's that balance of the personal and professional, again, that pendulum swing. How to be myself. So bringing my full self as a therapist, and that means my unique way of living and being, bringing my heart into it, as well as the professionalism. That one I grappled with for a few months this year in placement, because it was like I didn't want to bring too much of myself, because I didn't want to break that professional boundary and become too personal. So, but then at times I actually noticed I was being too clinical, too professional, and I wasn't bringing the heart in to sessions, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. It sounds like a very difficult position to be in. Yeah. It's a hard balance to achieve. It takes a lot of practice and skill.
Yeah. And on the flip side, in personal life, is making sure I'm not too much of a therapist or a therapist to my friends and family.
Yeah.
So there's this constant dance, right, of in each relationship, in each scenario, what's being asked of me. And when it comes to my own problems, my own issues, unresolved things that come up, trust and safety so my clients can feel that trust and safety. I think it's that I'm doing the work for me as well. And to be able to serve fully, I need to do that for myself. And that it comes from, a lifetime of experiences and my motto of practice what I preach.
Yes.
And really just living to that. And, this is a key one. Holding myself accountable and having people to hold me accountable.
Yes.
So being verbally open with my friends and family and with professional supervision to actually say, hey, can you pull me up when you notice something? And it's that constant coming back to that learner, being that learner and growing, and just really just living it with every fibre of my being through my cells, just living that mentality and that humanality and that soul is like, I know I'm not putting pressure on myself to be perfect. I know I'm not going to be perfect. There might be times in session where something's happened, and it's happened to me before, 5 minutes before session. I get some news about something and I have this emotional dump, and it's like,
I can't deal with it.
What am I going to do? and it takes a lot, but I've got these processes and structures in place, and I teach this to clients to teach safety and to teach techniques before you get into like a panic attack or overwhelm or stress, is you teach techniques when you're safe and grounded. And so through my own therapy and my own personal practice, I do that, where I teach and implement these coping mechanisms, these beneficial little exercises, I suppose. And so that when it happens in session, I can, sort of pull myself together. And then there's that element of being human with the client, being honest, but in a professional way, and just letting them know, hey, and I've had a couple of supervisors say that they've done this too, is saying, hey, if you notice that I cry in session, I haven't had to do this myself, but I remember a supervisor saying, if you notice that I cry in session, something's happened in my personal life that's, you don't need to worry. It's not your thing to be of concern. And I have someone that I'm talking to about it, but the emotions are real and they might come up.
Yeah.
And just doing that, that takes vulnerability.
That does.
Yeah.
That is amazing for a supervisor to say.
Yeah.
Because they got the job of educating the next therapist in the way that this person can be vulnerable and say, hey, something's going on, emotions might come up.
Yeah.
I'll do my best to contain myself, but if they come up, they come up. Because sometimes in those moments, you just have no choice.
Yeah, we're human. We have hearts. We have
It's like
feelings.
trying to control a mid-panic attack.
Yeah, it's like trying to control the weather. Sometimes you just can't. And that's, and it's just, I think it's having the, like, prefacing it, having the structure, having the communication. The communication's the key thing, and reassuring clients that I've got my people. I've got my support, so it's not going to be a dump on you. It's not too much. I mean, there's times when I've needed to cancel sessions for the day and giving notice if I really can't handle it. And it's just having that openness and I suppose that reciprocity, giving the client the opportunity to support in that way, right?
Yeah, that's very empowering for a client too. It's like, it's not their job to fix you.
That's right.
But just being an understanding presence, they'll probably be the most empathetic to you as well.
Yeah.
Just knowing that what they're going through, they're not alone.
Yes.
That's very important. Like, your therapist isn't made out of steel.
Yeah, that's right.
It's important to bring out the humility, and thank you very much for bringing out the humility in you.
I really appreciate you asking me about it.
Yeah. I'll be sure to ask more spicy questions in the future.
Please do. I really enjoy it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time, Ella.
Thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, it's been really good.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us once again. And if there is anything that you would like to input, please make sure you comment, and also like and subscribe to follow along for more of these conversations where we explore topics and really just break down the barriers of therapy and healing and life and wounding and how we can thrive and be able to serve one another, live in love, and have harmony, embodying who we truly are on a holistic level. That's what I'm all about. If it interests you, I would love to hear from you. And if you want to jump on a podcast or have a topic discussed, I would really, really love to do that as well. So go gently, go in love, look after yourself, look after others, and just have a bit of fun where you can. Thanks, Nikki.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Until next time.
Thank you.
See ya.